You made a great point there about upskilling, which leads us nicely onto a LinkedIn post you shared recently. I will add in the show notes and the email I send out to everyone after. But it was about putting the cart before the horse, in the sense of trying to drive behavior change without knowing if people have the tools and the skills to achieve behavior change first. So tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, and I think this was sparked. There was a couple of posts that I put up, and this is kind of a big message I've been speaking about recently, is in an organization or just like in school and life, we were never taught these things. No one ever taught us about our brains. No one ever taught us like very fundamental things. But well, how do I cultivate a habit? What is the behavior? How does that come into all of this? And the expectations that we're seeing from people are, well, we want you to do this. We want to adapt this new culture in our organization, or we would like to see a behavioral change across a whole organization, without even thinking, do people even understand or have the skills to do that? Now, when we harmonize things like the science of it, right? Because as much as our brains work with us, they also work against us. And it's so valuable to know how our brains can work against us in situations when we're trying to cultivate a new habit or behavior. So if we taught those things first, those underlying skills that would then make us successful in cultivating a new behavior, because now we're consciously aware of what could work against us. Well, that seems like it's a good place to start. And it's the same with learning. It's not that we don't know how to learn. We all know how to learn. Well, we could definitely be learning better. We have so much more information on the science of it, of how our brains work, about methodology and theories, but we're not using it. We're not taking the time to learn those, which would help us succeed in so many other aspects, and not only our professional lives, but definitely our personal ones.
Yeah, one example that came to my mind when I first saw your post was that one about the feedback culture. So if people say that they want a better feedback culture, or they want to give better feedback, often the gut reaction is to send out more surveys. But then if people don't have the fundamental principles or ability to give clear, concise feedback or accept feedback openly, then all you do is just try and solve the problem by doing more. And it's the same with upskilling. If people don't have the mindset or understand the behavior of upskilling, then just hitting them with a load of content also doesn't help, does it? So how can we kind of put these better foundations in place to ensure that we're not just doing more to try and solve something? Instead, we're trying to put a good base layer and also use some of that learning science about the brain.
When I started in on all of this, like at the time when I first started looking into neuroscience and started sort of my own studies, and at the time I was a CLO, or like CLO wasn't even a word back then. Like, it just wasn't. I was the head of learning. And when I realized how hard it was, and then I was like, oh my God, like the learning journey itself, to learn about neuro and the brain, and then to sort of like start making correlations between what we do as practitioners. I mean, it was exceptionally hard. But then to go back to everyone else and say, ooh, here's my white flag and I'm waving it too. Right. And I think I've said this so many times, and I'm not telling people they're doing it wrong, because if it was doing it wrong, then I was doing it wrong the whole time too. But we just need to be doing it better. Like, just a little bit better. So to get into these principles and to get under the skin of things, I mean, Gary, you said feedback, right? I mean, when it comes to the feedback stuff, you can do your survey stuff, but what happens when you're in person? And I've talked to organizations about this when they're doing those soft skills and the feedback and whatnot. So what happens when someone's having like a really bad day and you're face to face with them? And they are you don't even know it. You can't see it, but they might be, immensely emotionally sensitive at the time. So, are we taking those things into consideration? But then what about yourself? So now we're looking at things like we've got emotional regulation versus cognitive function, right? If I'm starting to feel something, right? Emotions are the chemical responses happening in our brains. The feelings are those tangible experiences that are happening because of what's happening in our brains. But if I can start to feel my heart rate's accelerating, my hands are getting sweaty, I'm starting to get a little bit anxious, how do I down regulate that so I can have a proper conversation with you? Because sometimes feedback's like, and some people love feedback, they take it well, that's not a problem. But again, what if we did teach people those underlying human things that would help us to listen to each other a little bit better? And not talking active listening, I'm talking about those reactions again. those things that we can't see, but that we can definitely, we can't like, I don't like to say control because I feel like we don't necessarily take control of the brain. And that's why I say we join forces with it. We learn to work with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe some of the small actions are like asking people if this is a good time to give or receive feedback, like setting these things as the cultural, so that you can, I guess, like you said, sometimes our brain works against us. And if it is, that might dictate that it's not the right environment or the right moment to do a
Mm,
particular thing.
yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I'm interested to hear like what people have to say in the chat about these things too. It's like, I look back at everything that I've learned in the past decade, and then I see kids who are starting to learn these things from a young age now. Thank goodness, right? And I was like, wow, if I would have known, well, how would I have been different as me if I would have known these things when I was growing up and someone have taught me a little bit, and they're starting to in schools, but like just a little bit about my brain, a little bit what it means when, I describe it to the kids as like your Amy and your Corey. Amy is your amygdala, that's your emotional processing center, and Corey is your executive function. So what would happen if I would have known about these things when I was growing up and how that would have changed me?
Yeah.